Good evening, and thank you all for coming to the Montana Museum of Art and Culture. My name is Barbara Kuster. I am the director of this wonderful institution. It's a great pleasure to introduce Brandon Reinches tonight, but I have a few remarks before I do that. If you're new to the museum or to the university, the Montana Museum of Art and Culture is home to more than 10,000 art objects and artifacts. And each year we host 7 or 8 exhibitions in our 2 galleries, the Malloy and the Paxson, right here in Part TV. And if you want to learn more about us, of course, go to our website or talk to one of the staff persons here tonight. In addition to our wonderful sponsors, we always want to thank our members, because it's through the membership program we're able to bring you programs like tonight's. So if you're not a member, please consider joining us. So Saturday, once again, is our last day for these exhibitions, and we hope you return. Our next exhibitions will open March 24th, and they will feature the abstract paintings of Lori Fendrick, who is really one of the top artists in America today. She's also a professor at Hofstra University. She's an art critic. She's a multifaceted individual. And she'll present a lecture and attend the first Friday reception that will be April 1st. Pulitzer Prize winner Mark Stevens contributed an essay to the catalog that comes with Lori, and he will speak at 8 p.m. in the University Theater on April 14th. That's part of the President's Lecture Series. Besides Lori, at the same time, we will present Rudy Audio student Barry Hood, and his exceptional sculptural glass will reside in the Malloy Gallery next. He'll present a lecture and be available at the first Friday, and that will be May 6th. And now I'll introduce tonight's speaker. Brandon Reinches is, of course, our curator of art. He's previously worked at the Speed Art Museum in Louisville, Kentucky, the Akron Art Museum in Akron, Ohio, and the Holter in Helena. He received his undergrad degree in painting and drawing from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and his MA in curatorial and critical studies from the University of Louisville. He's published articles and criticism in the Surface Design Association Journal, the Resource Library Magazine, Black Robin Press, Drum Lumen Views, the National Council on Education in the Ceramic Arts Journal, and Edible Missoula. Brandon has done simply an outstanding job working in concert with the rest of the MMAC team to design our exhibitions, create informative educational components, and facilitate a superb gallery experience for all. These particular exhibitions that we have in place now have tested us in excellent ways, especially within the limits of having no dedicated building. They've challenged us to uphold our professional practice standards and stewardship, true for both the visiting loan collection and our permanent collection. And these exhibitions have required highly specialized shipping, hours and hours of condition reporting, an effective and efficient exhibition layout, and security upgrades. We always strive for excellence in all that we do, and these exhibitions have raised our bar, challenging us to be the best museum we can be. Like all our staff, Brandon, as curator of art, works extremely hard for us and for art and artists. We are grateful for him, and I think you'll learn a great deal this evening. So please mute your cell phones and give a warm welcome to Brandon Reinches.
Thanks very much. Nice to see so many familiar faces out there. I thought that I would start out with this quote. And for those of you who are coming specifically to look at masterpieces, I hope you're not disappointed. It's kind of a roundabout way of getting to the subject, so bear with me and I'll deliver the goods, I promise. So, this painting is always face forward, always confrontational. There is no reverse, no backside to painting. And I think that that's kind of a interesting quote, because contrary to what you might think, the front of a painting, what we see, does not tell us the whole story. It's often the backside that reveals this hidden information, other things that we don't necessarily see when it's on display that can have a completely fascinating story. And it's the backside that's often called the verso in the museum field that contains this information. And it's that information that often remains hidden to the public. So you see that even though I'm talking about the masterpieces in this wonderful collection, I'm kind of doing it with the backs to the wall. So I wanted to start out with that wonderful image of Bouguereau. This is not the back of the Bouguereau, incidentally. It's the back of another painting. Most of these pieces are exhibited with their backs in a way that is public knowledge. So we're not sneaking around taking photos of the backs of paintings or anything like that without anybody's permission, because some of the information, not everybody's comfortable sharing this information. So the information that's on the back of a painting actually corresponds to how old and how well known a particular painting is. The paintings that are more famous tend to have more information and more juicy information that you can latch on to. So while the front of a painting might appear to be timeless and kind of unchanging, at least conservators and museum professionals really strive to make that the case, right? It's the back of the painting that accumulates things as it travels and gives us those details about provenance and condition. So even though I'm specifically referring to paintings, and that's in part because of our distinct pleasure in hosting this Renoir, Magritte, Gauguin, and other European masterpieces from a private collection, these concepts really can extend to other objects as well, although that idea of front and back in what is seen and what remains hidden is pretty unique to paintings. It's hard to do the same thing with sculptures. They still have some of the same things that I'm talking about, and certainly works on paper it works with too. So these questions also serve as an extension for this Molly course that we just talked about, the questions of connoisseurship, which has been primarily concerned with issues relating to the quality of an object, which necessarily is preoccupied with the front of a painting. So now, kind of as an extension of some of those classes, we're flipping the painting over and we're talking about all these other pieces. And I specifically wanted to design tonight's talk to be separate from those Molly classes, just so that there wasn't too much repeat information. So then, what does the back of a painting really tell us? When you look at the back of a painting, what do those marks and the labels and all that hardware, what kind of experiences do they describe? The answer is still related to the fundamentals of connoisseurship, or judgment of quality in artwork. This one's from the Montana Museum of Art Permanent Collection. It's actually an artwork that we don't know very much about, and this is the only clue that we have about the artist's identity. So you can see immediately how important these labels are. When we look at a work of art, what we are seeing are a series of cumulated histories. An artwork is not static and unchanging, but it's a dynamic historical object. And these are just examples of different things that you might find on the back of a painting. This was on the back of a panel, and I clipped it out just to emphasize. Some of them are very detailed and very in-depth. We can use the object itself as a source of information regarding its own making in history. One of the texts I had the class read was this e-conservation article called Science and Restoration at the Service of Interpretation, which is kind of a long and dull-sounding thing, and I think most people in the class found it to be a long and maybe dull article, but paintings conservator Dimitrios Doumas tells us in the article, art depends on materials and techniques that acquire unique historical importance and signification. Artists use matter and transfigure it into art, an experience conveyed across a series of historical records. So, whether we are aware of them or not, these histories affect our experience of an art object. This is a panel board, and what you're seeing I'll talk about in just a second, but these are wax seals. This is the only image I could find that, even though it's fuzzy, really shows you a good example of a wax seal. The history of an object can be deduced by examining the physical aspect of a work of art. This includes the series of ephemera that accumulate on a work of art as it circulates through sales and loans. The artist does it sometimes, but also people who acquire the painting kind of add to this mess that you see on the back that is so fascinating. Examples of this ephemera include such things as artist's signature, museum accession number, notes, scribbles, the date of a painting, the type of frame or stretcher used, auction labels, wax seals bearing family crests and heraldry, custom stamps, inscriptions, old exhibition didactics, which sometimes we do at the Montana Museum of Art and Culture. We end up keeping the label with the artwork so that that information is readily available just for reference. Inventory stamps of famous collectors, conservation notations, exhibition stamps, transit or freight stickers, which is what you see here. This is one of the pieces that came through the Montana Museum of Art and Culture on the exterior of a crate, rather. But oftentimes conservators, when they look at the back of a painting, will take these things and encapsulate them in mylar and attach them to the back of the painting on a backing board. All these details provide clues about the life of this object as it passes from continent to continent over the span of decades or centuries. Some of the images are anonymous, but when they're included in public collections, I've tried to indicate, and if you have any questions about those, let me know. So from this physical evidence, a number of determinations can be made. It's the material aspects that often supply most of the information about a painting's life and provide insights about the artist, the date of creation, who owned it, who bought it and sold it, where it was exhibited, its current condition, and its prior conservation, or arguably what is the conveyor of meaning within paintings or its context. The physical evidence is often found on the protective backing which shields the canvas on the stretcher bars and frames, and here you can see that it's limited to the exterior. Nothing's put on the back of the painting, and sometimes those we'll see pieces of information appear directly on a painting, and we'll show a couple examples of that label, those kind of labels later, and we'll break those apart. So especially if something is painted on a panel, that's when you'll see information adhered directly to the back of a painting or the wooden support. It's pretty much uncommon to find any sort of information written directly on the back of a canvas, except for occasional information that the artist writes either just after finishing the painting or kind of during the process, or sometimes inscriptions to different collectors or donors or things like that. So here's a couple more examples. And even though this looks a little obtuse or hard to access, it is. So a lot of the time the information that you're looking for, you'll get very little information, and you'll have to figure out what it means. So it's not as clear-cut of a type of documentation as other forms of documentation that accompany painting are. Usually it's kind of the last resort. If you have nothing else to go on, this is what you turn to, and you start teasing information out of this. In investigating the reverse of paintings is not a new phenomenon, but relies on a number of precedents, the historical precedents as well as what's happening with contemporary art. So there's this tradition that goes back to really some of the oldest paintings in Western art, and it also is a practice that continues today with contemporary artists, and we'll talk a little bit about some of those contemporary artists as well. In the book, Dawn of the Golden Age, Netherlandish Art from 1580 to 1620, the authors remind us that the development of vanitas, which is what you're looking at, and that's these 16th and 17th century still lifes primarily that were found in the Netherlands, meant as a way of kind of meditating on the transient parts of life and also the earthly pleasures. That was preceded by things like this, where artists depicted skulls and other still life materials. It was really the birth of the still life as well, that related to our own earthly demise and temporality on the back of canvas. So you can see that this is one small detail, one small clue that was included just on the reverse of the left wing of this piece by Hans Memling. And of course, this one, this is the famous piece by Cornelius Norbertus Giebritus from the mid-1600s, and he painted the back of a painting. So that's what we're not looking at the back of a painting. We're looking at the front of a painting that looks like the back of a painting. And one of the books that I recommended in the Molly course is this really wonderful kind of poetic musing about one particular still life, not this one, called Still Life with Oysters and Lemon by Mark Dottie. And it's a book that I keep coming back to for a variety of reasons. It's a very interesting take on connoisseurship, but then he offers little gems. So he describes this artwork, coincidentally, in that book, and says, "A painting doesn't especially seem like an object, since we always seem to be looking through it, into it, rather than at it. This is the sublime joke of Norbertus Giebrecht's The Back of a Picture, a painting, which he calls it by a different title, by the way, a painting which represents a painting with its back turned to us, so that what we see is the stretched backside of the canvas, its rough and lustrous gray, its raveled edges, plain prose. In a way, there is nothing here to see, despite the bit of paper emblazoned with a number, 36, attached to the upper left-hand side of the canvas. But that is, in another way, the point, that whatever image this painting might bear on its other side is forever denied to us, a permanent mystery. And if we turn this image over to solve the problem once and for all and get to the other side, what would we see? The backside of a stretched canvas, of course. Or we could say that the painting points to the here and now, beautiful blankness, the plain everyday virtue of the back of a canvas, a good ordinary thing, joining the sturdy republic of things that Dutch painting is, and reminding us at the same time that even a painting, even this painting itself, is another thing. And the head of the Old Masters painting department at Sotheby's, Christopher Apostle, calls this painting a joke on connoisseurship and looking at the backs of paintings for provenance. So kind of a visual pun. So we've talked a lot about kind of establishing these details of provenance. What is provenance exactly? And you must have an idea in your mind. Provenance is the path of a physical object as it travels throughout history, and it's confirmed through a series of ownerships and documents. Provenance comes from the French provenir, which means to come from, and it denotes the origin, the source, the history of the ownership, or the location of an object. The purpose of provenance is to confirm the time, place, and person responsible for the production of the object and subsequent owners. Typically accounts for the whole history of an object from the point when it was made all the way up to present. Comparative techniques, expert opinion, and the results of various kinds of scientific tests may also provide this information, but establishing provenance is essentially a matter of documentation. And that's what I'm calling these things on the back of paintings. It's a form of documenting. I'm talking about it as ephemera, but it's really a different type of document than what we're used to. Provenance performs a few tasks that assume great importance, especially to art historians, museum professionals, and also collectors. It can also help establish that an object is original, has not been altered, is not a forgery, is not a reproduction, is not stolen, and is not looted art. These are all kind of hot button issues in the museum field right now. Knowledge of provenance can help assign an object to a known artist, something that's called attribution, and a documented history can be of use in helping to prove ownership. So provenance of an important work of art can make a considerable difference in its selling price on the art market. If you know who the artist is and what they did, it can radically alter what that painting or that particular artwork gets. I talked about this example in class where a painting was supposedly a Frans Hals. It was worth a certain amount. It was actually demoted to a follower or the school of Rembrandt. They found out that the Frans Hals signature was a later addition. It was demoted to a school of Rembrandt. The price plummeted so that it was only worth a couple $1,000s. Then, actually, it went on the market as a school or follower of Rembrandt, and people started paying attention to it and said, you know, I think that's actually a Rembrandt. And even though it was called a school or a follower of Rembrandt, the price escalated and it sold for $4 million to the Toledo Museum of Art. So you can just see how it really fluctuates. So an artwork's provenance can take different forms depending on its context, how it's used, and what the amount of information is that's known. It can range in some cases from a single artist's name, which when I showed you the piece from the permanent collection where we just had that one label with one name on it, to an entry in a database that's much more extensive, and then it can even include a whole scholarly catalog or a monograph. Sometimes the provenance on one single painting will just fill this whole volume. So I'm sure you're getting tired of looking at this one slide. And I thought this would be an apt way to follow it. This is an assistant curator at the Minnesota Institute of the Arts, Erica Holmquist Wall. She's the curatorial assistant in paintings and modern sculpture. And I really wish all curators looked this good. I'm thinking about going for my glamour shots next week to try to provide something as enticing. I would like to disagree with Dottie that when he talks about the back of that painting that there is nothing to see. Even the smallest detail, such as that label with the number 36 on it, can be significant given the appropriate context. And that's one thing I stressed in the class, is that you can start with that single number and it can provide a whole world of information if you know what that number relates to. In this case, Erica Holmquist Wall was involved with a conservation project, and she says, I quickly learned to get as excited about the back of a painting as the front of a painting because there was so much to be found. None of it had ever really been documented before. There's a narrative on the back which has to be reconstructed. And as part of this conservation project, she discovered one of those little wax seals that I pointed out earlier. That wax seal was on the back of a 17th century Dutch painting, and she was able to confirm that the seal was the seal of Baron Alphonse von Rothschild, the famous art collector. And she says, we knew that the Rothschild inventories were cataloged. Every painting was accounted for. We also knew that these paintings were looted during wartime, designated for Hitler's Führermuseum that he was designing for Linz, Austria. So then she cross-referenced these Rothschild's records with the Third Reich records, and was able to verify that Nazis did indeed seize the painting, but also that the painting was returned to the Rothschild family. So that last part is really important. Not only was it able to help the museum avoid a complex and potentially expensive restitution process, so many public institutions have discovered Nazi looted art in their collections and have voluntarily stepped forward and done the right thing and tried to contact the original owners and been able to restitute those works to those people. And so knowing that this piece actually wasn't involved with that, they were able to keep it in their collection. Enough of her. Other details are less dramatic but nonetheless interesting. When I was working as an assistant to the conservator at the Montana Historical Society, I worked with M. Randall Ash. She was a conservator and she was preparing the Poindexter collection for a national traveling exhibition. And what really stayed with me, this is a work by Robert De Niro, Sr., the father of the actor. And when we were cleaning these paintings, there was a lot of information on the back, but the thing that, from that whole experience of months working in this basement helping her with these paintings, were these paintings by De Niro all had these handprints wrapped around the stretcher bars. So you could see these paint-smeared hands grabbing the stretcher bars as he was working it. And you can see in many cases he attacks the canvas or paints so vigorously. He's pushing so hard you can see the vertical and horizontal stretcher bars that are popping through. Here's another one that I think you can see that stretcher bar even more vigorously. So not only did this detail suggest something about the circumstances of their making, perhaps the energy of or the necessity involved in their making, but it also caused me to appreciate the artist and the artwork much more. Oftentimes, the reverse contains an additional piece of art. These works remain hidden by a backing board or a protective dust cover or even these framers paper that all frame shops put on the backs now. The protective covers can also provide important details about a work's trajectory, helping establish maybe the date of the frame or sometimes even the date of the work of art itself. So this is, as you can read at the bottom, Village Île-à-Moi from Josephine Hale in our permanent collection. And that's exactly what happened. We were reframing this piece for an exhibition last year. We took the protective backing paper off, and on the back side, you can see the detail of the paper around the edges. On the back side is this nude, and it's one of her strongest and most well-rendered nudes. She did a lot of figure studies, but this one really is captivating, especially the way that she's kind of suggestively tugging at the corner of the top of the canvas, maybe saying, I'm going to show you what's on the other side, and it's just a dull landscape, nothing like me. So, also, if you'll notice in the upper right-hand corner, written in chalk is the date, and that's presumably the date of the painting. There was so few dates that she provided with her artwork, it was really striking to come across this. And the date is 9/29/1933, or it's written in the European version, 29/9/33. So it's a starting point for us as being one of the few pieces by Hale that's dated. Not only that, marks on the stretcher bar indicate that this artist supply shop in Paris called Lucien Lefebvre-Fournet at 13 Rue Vavine near the Jardin de Luxembourg in the Boulevard de Montparnasse that operated the time that she was there between World War I and World War II. She lived in Paris early on, left, and then came back in 1926 to pursue art. So we can kind of pinpoint the time between 1926 and when she left in 1935 as the time she was purchasing these supplies. Not only do we know that she frequented that shop, but we've also been able to identify identical marks on other works in our collection. Frances Carroll Brown, who also traveled to Europe, we can pinpoint that not only that the two women were in Paris at the same time, but they shopped at the same store. So that's details like that become really engaging, and then you wonder, well, who's this Lucien Lefebvre-Fournet? How do we find out more about him? And we can go deeper. Incidentally, that purveyor of art materials also supplied Eugene Boudin and Piet Mondrian, among others. So it was really quite a popular place. And by examining the materials, it can give us insights into conserving the works and how they approached making their pieces. So another example is the discovery of 3 previously unknown drawings on the back of one of Leonardo da Vinci's major works in the collection of the Louvre, The Virgin and Child with St. Anne. This piece was conserved in 2008, and when that happened, the curator, Sylvain Lavassière, pointed out that some gray marks that had been previously dismissed as stains were actually a horse's head, a half of a human skull, and then the one on the right is almost unreadable, but it ended up being the infant Jesus with a lamb. And they weren't able to see this with the naked eye, but this is through infrared photography. You can see the area. You can see the vertical cross stretch, the stretcher bars there, in that arrow mark that's on the second one towards me, shows up here. You can see it on the right-hand side of the canvas, so that's the approximate location. And when you look at the back of that, you think, well, that's nothing. You know, there's nothing there, like Mark Dottie said. But it, in fact, may have been preparatory sketches. Even though the drawings, this was one of the pieces that was open, it went unnoticed for 500 years. So even though it was right in front of people's eyes, it took somebody with an inquiring mind. And I thought that there's a gentleman named Francis Ames Lewis. He's an art historian and a vice president of the Leonardo da Vinci Society. His comment was, "We don't look at the back of paintings enough." I thought that was very apt. So a careful examination of the physical construction of an artwork is a lesson in how the artist, what the artist's intent was. It really, when you look at the back and you realize that these are preparatory sketches and that they may have related to pieces on the front, it can really teach you a lot. When we examine its condition, and registrars and conservators routinely do assessments of artworks, they're called condition reports, as Barbara talked about. We did hundreds of hours of condition reports last year, and the masterpieces show it ended up being really quite extensive. And so by condition, it's not good or bad. You don't really mean good or bad, but it's an analysis of the component parts of an artwork and an assessment of their relative stability or instability. An artwork's condition is the sum of its whole history of events that have happened to it. And it's much like the rings on a tree tell us the date of the tree, or you can tell what annual weather patterns were, or you can tell which year's fires were. So that's kind of the same way. And looking at those tree rings, you're looking a little bit at the condition of a painting in the same way. So from a painting's condition, we're able to determine causal effects that are often intangible but allow inferences to be made. So canvas paintings are incredibly complex, essentially a series of interdependent systems. And by looking at how they're made and what they're made from, we can attribute works of art to a particular artist or even a particular time and determine if they're authentic or not. So you can see that these are the different parts. The anatomy of a painting includes a support, or what's labeled canvas up here. It doesn't have to be a canvas. It can be a panel, or it can be linen. You know, it doesn't have to be a cotton necessarily. And then that is attached to an auxiliary support, or a stretcher or a strainer. The difference between a stretcher and a strainer is a stretcher is able to move and be keyed out with these little keys. And I brought the keys down in the corner. This is an example of a stretcher, so that tension, you can maintain tension as the artwork changes according to temperature and humidity. A strainer is just two dumb pieces of wood butted together and fixed with nails or glue or something like that. But they're very significant because sometimes you'll be able to determine if an artwork's a forgery if there's a series of strainers, and then sometimes a stretcher pops in, or you think, well, this piece has undergone significant conservation at some point in its life. So for instance, in another long and dull article that I required my class to read called Scientific Examination of Old Master Paintings by Nicholas Eastow, he talks about examining stretchers, frames, and panels and says, We know that there were well-established and powerful joiners and cabinet makers guilds in the Netherlands who protected their monopolies by restrictive charter and whose products were identified from their makers' marks. So you're able to see those specific makers' marks and even relate them back to not only the artist who made the painting, but who made the stretchers. So another thing that he says, Istad says, is that all the pieces that come with this, that poke around the edge, those fingerprints or sloppy priming of the canvas, and you're able to see little specks on the back and tell how that was made. Of course, it helps to look at the front too, but the front is often covered up by the painting or by the image, and you're not able to look past that. So in one instance, the ground, which is a layer of gesso put on over the sizing of the canvas, is given a tinting, and that tinting is a colored ground. And Istad also talks about how that tinting or that colored ground, which is called imprimatura, is something that you can look at very specifically, where it began. And the reason why it's important was it allowed artists to develop all sorts of wild and different visual effects than what they were used to achieving. So one artist would say, oh wow, that looks great. I wonder how he did that. It must be that red-gray ground that he's been using. So we're able to see the development of a red-gray ground in the early 17th century and how it expanded in its use. And then we're able to look backwards and trace it back to a point of origin, much like a scientist such as an epidemiologist looks at a disease to discover its point of origin. So this is not the back of a painting. This is a photograph of a back of a painting. It's very unassuming, right? I wanted to mention a few curatorial and artistic projects that I'm aware of which examine the back of paintings in informing contemporary culture. It's really been a phenomenon, I think, within the last 5 or so years that this has exploded. Not only this gentleman, but there's an exhibition called Changing Sides, the backs of paintings and their secrets, that was in Germany, Aachen, Germany, from 2006 to 2007. And so you'd come to see a show like the Masterworks, and instead of seeing Renoir, Magritte, and Gauguin, you'd see the backs of them, which I think could be very disappointing when you walk to the gallery with these expectations. But and I've heard this introduced as a conceptual, people who don't like conceptual art. Well, I don't think it's necessarily about conceptual art at this point. It's an examination of the backs of paintings in kind of a privileging of the audience in allowing them to see stuff that normally they're denied. So that Philip, this is the back of a Bram van Velde painting. He also did the back of a Picasso painting. And he worked in conjunction with these institutions to photograph the backs of these pieces. This is another artist who does also photography but film of the back of paintings, and I haven't seen any of the back of his painting films. Gerard Byrne, Simon Menner. And it was very interesting. He has a website where he posts these, and he's been doing a number of projects related to this, and also a lot related to German history. So this is in the Neue Nationalgalerie in Berlin, and the back of a Paul Klee. Just to keep you on your toes, I thought I'd throw in the front of a painting so you can see exactly what we're looking at. George Gross. And then here is this Haeckel painting. So this is the back of the painting. This is the inclusion or the addition of an extra artwork by Haeckel that wasn't necessarily made for public view. He's recycling the canvas, or he's taking advantage of that extra space. And then, last but not least, there's a gentleman named, here's a couple more by Simon, Salvador Dali. Vic Munoz, I find perhaps the most interesting and the most ambitious from both a conceptual and a physical standpoint. Rather than relying solely on photographs, Munoz assembles a team of dedicated craftsmen, artists, forgers, and technicians. Then he works with the institutions, takes detailed photographs, and reproduces these pieces exactly, verbatim. So he's worked with MoMA, the Guggenheim, the Art Institute of Chicago, and here you see the back of Starry Night. There's the wonderful piece by Seurat. And I think that this, I'm not sure which one this is. They didn't have this one labeled when I was looking at the gallery information. But not only does he reproduce these on a one-to-one scale in a very disconcerting manner, he goes through and realizes every scratch, every dent, and every scribble that is to be exactly faithful to these pieces. So he takes authentic-looking labels, even worn tape. He'll take old tape that's kind of stuck on the bottom and reproduce that tape exactly. And Munoz said in an unpublished interview, "Whenever someone wants to see if an artwork is real, the first gesture is to look at its back or at its base, the part of it that is normally not visible to anyone but experts, dealers, museum conservators, or the artists themselves. This happens because while the image's objective is to remain eternally the same, its support is constantly changing, telling a story, showing its scars, its labels, its period cliches. So when a cousin of mine told me that his 7-year-old could paint a Picasso, I said, yeah, probably, but he couldn't do the back. As a teenager, I used to fix the neighbor's TV as a hobby, and he wanted to learn how to fix clocks too. Whenever something's function is basically visual, there's always an opening in the back for curiosity to do its damage. People who have seen images 1 million times in books go to museums for a chance to read the labels. They would be much happier if the painting was turned backwards, so instead of having to associate name to image, they would have to imagine the picture while reading the label. I think that's a very strange idea. You can see how these pieces accumulate, even though these are reproductions of the pieces, they just accumulate these labels. There we go, there's Nighthawks from the Art Institute. So this fascination with the backs of paintings as a source of mystery and hidden information has also found its way into popular culture. These are screenshots of a video game called EverQuest 2. It's a multiplayer online video game, role-playing game. And they're using the backs of paintings within this virtual world as a way of accessing hidden information. They even have a back of painting tutorial for how to use these for navigational and strategic components. And I think it's really strange that the backsides of paintings in this conceptual virtual space act as secret portals or the locations on which these players can place a limited amount of notes or information, which is a concept that's really remarkably similar to what we're doing at art museums. This is a single piece, and I just thought this would be a fun one to deconstruct. This is a piece by Tom Thompson, one of the group of 7 Canadian artists, that went on sale in 2008, and as part of the sale through an auction house called Joyner Waddington Canadian Fine Art, they deconstructed the back of this painting as a way to talk about its provenance, but also to hype its market value. It's only 8.5 by 10.5 inches, really tiny. It was painted in Ontario's Algonquin Park, and these markings, some of which are mysterious and some which are very readily readable, kind of add to that whole mystique about the painting and this idea that Thompson was painting right in his prime in this time period of 1915 to 1917. Rob Cowley, the vice president of the auction house, says, For him to sign and title the work on the back is incredibly rare. You don't see it very often. It is the collection of markings on winter morning that make it a unique proposition for the Thompson collector. So the history of the painting is told on the reverse side, and he says, you're not going to see another painting like this in the future. The painting sold for just shy of $1 million, which with the buyer's premium, which wasn't a record for Thompson's sale, but it was a respectable price that talked about that staying power. And it's kind of an interesting amalgamation of marks. And up in A, at point A there in the box, you see that's Thompson's signature, Winter Morning, Tom Thompson. B, if you can see that right in the middle, 1917, that's an estate stamp. After Thompson's death, the other group of 7 members gathered together, and J.E.H. MacDonald devised a stamp that would mark works of art created by a group of 7 members to legitimize them and to kind of verify that they were created during the artist's lifetime. Part C, which is right at the top there, says very faintly, almost indelibly on the screen there, Spring 1915 J.M., the initials J.M., and that's written by Dr. J.M. McCollum, who is a friend of Thompson and also a patron of the artist in the group of 7, one of their better patrons. Point D, where it emphatically is scribbled not for sale, is another group of 7 artist, Lauren Harris. He evidently marked this painting as a favorite. He went over to his friend's studio and wrote "not for sale" right on the back so that the piece would be kept. And it's kind of important to see that's the kind of esteem that this painting had, and it was a keeper. Number E, letter E, is the 42 in red. That was the catalog number assigned to Winter Morning when it appeared in the 1949 exhibition at the Art Gallery of Toronto, which was formerly the Art Gallery of Ontario. F, number 9, that's an unknown meaning. We're not sure what that one means. G and K, if you can see them, they're in red there. They're very difficult to read, but it says Laidlaw, L-A-I-D-L-A-W, and also WCL, and are circled. And those are references to the Laidlaw family of Ontario, which included brothers Robert A. and Walter C., which is the WCL. H is number 152, Mrs. Harkness, and that refers to the artist's sister, who ended up with the painting after her brother's death and ended up owning it for an undetermined length of time. Number 7, and then the rest of them, I guess, are unknown. Number 7 is unknown. That I, J, number 1 is unknown. 14, number 3, 16, AM, and 33. These are all things that they haven't deciphered yet, but you can see the amount of information that they were able to glean. So, in conclusion, I wanted to stress just about how much the reverse of a painting can teach us about a work of art's social, economic, and historical and aesthetic value, if there is such a thing. Today we're largely interested in the conceptual makeup of a painting, though thinking about artworks as deeply embedded within a historical context harkens back to a time when thinking about art was doing something very different. And I think that things like this cause us to ask fundamental questions like, what is art? What happens if we regard it as a historical object rather than an art object? What happens when we can tell that a painting has undergone a significant conservation intervention? Or, what happens when some of that conservation previously done by restorers at some point erases some of the information that goes with the painting? So these last slides are a sequence of photographs that we're taking during the unpacking of one of the masterpieces, just so that I didn't exclude the masterpieces from the talk altogether. And this is what it looks like when we receive these pieces in. All of the art in our collections handled with painstaking care, and the process of unpacking and condition reportings, as Barbara said, can take hours for just a single work. And the reason I'm including these is it's a process that happens over and over again in museums across the country, and it's a process that's shrouded in a certain mystery, much like the back of paintings are. But it's exactly these processes that constitute the life of any artwork that is publicly exhibited. And by examining the complex social practices that surround a work of art, like affixing labels or numbers to the reverse of a painting, or even how they're packed, I think we learn more about the artworks themselves. So what you see is an outer crate and an inner collar with 1-inch foam to protect it. If you look through the plastic, you can actually see the Renoir on its side. As we get them, we remove the tape, and we're very careful to collect the staples, the staples that are holding the plastic in place, so that nothing comes into contact with the surface of that painting. There it is in its carrying case. And this is very important because nothing is touching that painting. Nothing touches the frame, nothing touches the front or the back. It's suspended on these little clips that are down in the left. You can see them along the left-hand side of the painting, and that's a way that paintings travel in a collar so that nothing damages them. So here's the back of this piece. And you can see all the different pieces, and if you read the exhibition catalog or know the piece from the exhibition, you know that it was originally, Mühlfeld was a German collector that commissioned the two self-portraits really, by Renoir at the same time. They stayed in his care for a very short time because he died not too long after. They went on the art market in Germany, and then they ended up traveling to Tokyo, and where they ended up in the collection there in the National Gallery and became some of the most important pieces of Western art in Japan. So when we see how far and wide this Renoir portrait of Wilhelm Mühlfeld has traveled, all those German galleries and the different Japanese museums that have sold or exhibited it, we realize its significance in the history of 20th century art when we look at a painting's reverse side and see the conservation labels or the exhibition labels that detail these painstaking preservation efforts like relining, or give us evidence of repairs of tears in the canvas. Even the presence, in this case, of this backing board that we see on the back, the security clips, and the presence of acid-free materials, we make assumptions about the value of what lies on the other side. And there it is. Thanks very much. If anybody has any questions about the exhibition or follow up to this talk, please let me know.